Welcome back. Tonight we begin with something a little darker, a subject not about medieval discomfort or historical figures, but about the terrifying, cold indifference of the natural world and how it actively conspires to silence human ambition. We're diving into the Bermuda Triangle, but forget the cartoonish depictions of cartoon octopuses and little green men. We're sailing into a place where the water doesn't want you, and the sky actively attempts to abandon you. It's a space on the map that has become synonymous with a disappearance so total, so absolute, that it redefines the very word gone. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's talk about the map that eats people. You are at the helm, not of a multi-million-dollar modern supertanker, not yet, but just a small, fast vessel. Or maybe you are 10,000 feet up in the cockpit of a mid-century transport plane, cutting a clean line through the Caribbean blue. The sun is high, maybe a little too bright, reflecting off the water so violently it forces you to squint. This is the postcard reality of the notorious triangle, the seductive contradiction that has lured countless vessels and aircraft to their doom. Look at the coordinates on your faded nautical chart or your modern GPS screen. You are somewhere within that vast, ill-defined boundary, the theoretical lines connecting Florida, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda. It looks like any other stretch of ocean. It feels, for a moment, like any other stretch of ocean. This is the first lie this place tells you. Forget the castles and the glamour of the Empress Hollywood sold you. The truth here is visceral. The fear is tactile. And the first thing that hits you is the silence. The normal, expected sounds of the sea, the rhythmic slap of the hull, the cry of a distant seagull, the low hum of the engine, they begin to dissipate, not dramatically, but subtly. The sound seems to become muffled, as if the air itself has grown thick, heavy, and unwilling to carry the vibrations of human noise. The sky above is still a blinding azure, but it has developed an unnerving metallic sheen, a shade of blue that feels engineered, synthetic, and wrong. And then you see the water. It's no longer the playful, translucent teal of the shallows. It has deepened to an oppressive, almost black indigo, a color that suggests a terrifying depth directly beneath your keel, a bottomless pit waiting patiently. This is the beginning of the unvarnished truth of the Bermuda Triangle experience. It is not an alien force field. It is the feeling of entering a vast, natural machine that has suddenly decided to stop obeying the laws of physics you have been taught. Now, your navigational equipment begins to protest. The compass is doing the Macarena. It's not just off by a few degrees. It's spinning circles like a drunken uncle at a wedding reception, settling on a random number, then jumping away from it with a shudder. You tap the glass. You curse the old technology. You try to rely on the radio direction finder, but all you get back is a wall of static, a high-pitched, insistent whine that feels less like a technical failure and more like a warning scream. That is the first moment the fear truly bites. The realization that your connection to the world, your lifeline, has been violently and totally severed. Congratulations, you've just been accepted into the vortex. You survived the initial calm. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a clear reading, a stabilizing signal? Sorry. This is the heart of the triangle. Nothing is comforting here. The air is suddenly, oppressively hot, thick with humidity that clings to your skin and makes the metal of the ship or the plane feel slimy to the touch. The instruments aren't just confused, they are actively failing. The RPM gauge on the engine is fluttering wildly. The altimeter in the cockpit is creeping downward despite the steady climb. You check the oil pressure. It's fluctuating. It is a slow, methodical, terrifying systemic shutdown. It's the equivalent of a perfectly healthy body suddenly suffering simultaneous organ failure, all while maintaining a calm exterior. Contradiction is the core of this terrifying place. You are surrounded by a vast, beautiful ocean, yet you are utterly alone. The weather reports you received just an hour ago promised clear sailing, but on the horizon, a wall of churning black cloud is suddenly materializing with impossible speed. It is a line of storm that is vertically rather than horizontally oriented, a pillar of thunderous darkness that seems to defy the very principles of meteorology. This is not a slow-moving front. This is an attack, and it is coming at you like a freight train, pulled by forces you cannot name and certainly cannot outrun. You might be a seasoned mariner, a pilot with thousands of hours logged, but in this moment, your experience is useless. All your training, all your confidence, is being stripped away by a force that operates outside the rule book. You try to raise Coast Guard again. You punch the radio button, hold the microphone close, and speak clearly, calmly, trying to conceal the sudden cold spike of panic in your gut. Coast Guard, this is Clipper 734, requesting immediate vector check. Instruments unreliable, experiencing rapid magnetic deviation. Over, you release the button, and you wait. You are met only with that insistent, furious static, a wall of white noise that is the sound of the universe hanging up on you. You try again. You yell this time, the composure gone, the raw human fear taking over. You are no longer navigating. You are pleading, and the only answer you get is a burst of static so loud and so sharp it makes you wince, followed by an absolute, profound, and terrifying silence. Not even the static is there anymore. Your radio, your last link to civilization, has gone dead. The ocean has taken the players and the microphone, and this is just how your journey starts. It only gets worse from here. So, you've felt the oppressive silence. You've watched your compass spin a frantic, useless jig, and you've tasted the metallic panic of utter disconnection. Now, let's pull back from the cockpit and the helm and look at the geometry of this terror. The world knows this place by a terrifying, elegant moniker, the Bermuda Triangle. But we're going to stop thinking about it as a mythical zone of influence and start defining it as the water's ultimate contradiction. It is an expanse of sapphire blue, sun-drenched, deceptively inviting ocean that holds the single most concentrated, continuous record of catastrophic, total, and unexplained disappearances in the modern world. The Bermuda Triangle is defined not by rigid, state-controlled boundaries like a nation, but by a chilling, fluid body count. Its rough edges scrape against the coast of Florida, stretch southeast to the island of Puerto Rico, and reach northeast to the elegant, unsuspecting beaches of Bermuda itself. Look at the map. It's massive. A 500,000 square mile watery graveyard that is one of the busiest shipping lanes and flight paths on the planet. This is the first contradiction, a place of such profound mystery that is also a global thoroughfare. Imagine a busy, crowded highway where cars simply vanish into the pavement every few miles without a sound or a trace of smoking wreckage. That is the Bermuda Triangle. We must immediately dismantle the most romanticized notions Hollywood sold you. This is not a unique zone of paranormal activity where little green men park their flying saucers or where an Atlantean crystal grid is causing localized time warps. To believe that is to ignore the cold, hard, and statistically terrifying truth of the area. But we must also resist the urge to immediately dismiss it all as simple coincidence or poor seamanship. The number of ships and aircraft that have disappeared here, not sunk, not wrecked, but simply vanished, often in calm weather and within radio range of land, defies easy categorization. This is the unvarnished truth. The triangle is a perfect storm of geographical, meteorological, and psychological factors that conspire to amplify human mistakes into total annihilation. Consider the human element for a moment. This area is a tropical transit point. meaning it's historically been a popular route for less than seasoned sailors, for early experimental commercial aircraft, and for pilots who were overconfident, undertrained, or possibly even drunk. Yes, alcohol played its part. The myth-busting truth is that an alarming number of early disappearances can be traced back to human arrogance and poor preparation. A man who trusts his faulty compass over his instincts is not a victim of a time warp. He's a victim of himself. But here's the next contradiction. What about the massive, well-maintained naval vessels, the experienced crews, the advanced airliners that also simply disappeared? We must account for the experienced captain and the seasoned pilot, men who knew the difference between a minor magnetic anomaly and the absolute horror of a complete navigational failure. The sheer scale of the losses is what haunts us. We are talking about hundreds of ships and aircraft and thousands of lives swallowed whole. This is not a slow, visible process. It is a sudden, total erasure. The hallmark of the triangle disappearance is the absolute absence of evidence. No oil slick, no life raft, no splintered wreckage bobbing in the tide. It is as if the objects were not sunk but surgically removed from the face of the earth. If a small two-seater plane goes down, the ocean is vast enough to conceal it forever. But a 500-foot naval collier carrying 306 men? That is a mass grave without a single headstone. And that is a statistical improbability that borders on the physically impossible. Next time you look at a photograph of a calm, turquoise Caribbean inlet, remember the real, visceral details of what that seemingly serene water conceals. That beautiful blue hides incredible, violent depths, and beneath those depths lies a geological and meteorological engine of unparalleled destruction. The Gulf Stream, an actual river of warm, fast-moving water, tears through the area, capable of carrying a massive piece of debris hundreds of miles in just a few hours. This rapid movement doesn't cause the disappearance, but it is the perfect accomplice. It cleans up the scene of the crime with ruthless efficiency, eliminating a search radius and turning a salvageable wreck into a needle in 1,000 haystacks. It is the janitor of the deep, ensuring that the triangle's terrifying reputation remains intact by meticulously removing the evidence. So what does this all mean? Is it a gateway to another dimension, or just a really poorly managed intersection of ocean currents and human error? The contradiction is the key. The Bermuda Triangle is both. It is a geographically complex area where weather is sudden and violent, where compasses do behave strangely due to a variety of factors, and where human mistakes are immediately and unforgivingly fatal. But it is also a place where the story of the disappearances, the final garbled radio transmissions, the sheer scale of the silent losses, has achieved a cultural significance that transcends mere statistics. It is a place where every accident is elevated to an enigma, and every loss is treated as an unsolved supernatural crime. Now that we have defined the terrifying stage, it's time to meet the victims and witness the first, most famous, and most utterly baffling conversation that died in the static. We are going to dive deep into the vanishing of Flight 19. We've established the terrifying stage, a vast, beautiful, yet utterly indifferent ocean that is perfectly poised to turn minor errors into absolute catastrophe. But the Bermuda Triangle, as a truly chilling cultural phenomenon, was not born of statistical anomaly or geological oddity. It was born on a clear, warm afternoon in December 1945, with the vanishing of 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, known collectively as Flight 19. This single incident, more than any other, cemented the Triangle's reputation, not because it was the first loss, but because of the sheer, agonizing horror of its final moments, all broadcast live over the radio. You need to forget the myth of an immediate silent snatch. The terror of Flight 19 was the sheer, protracted human disorientation of it all. We are humanizing the greats, in this case 5 trained naval airmen, led by a seasoned veteran. Their commander was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a man who had flown thousands of hours, a combat veteran who knew the sky better than his own home. This was a routine navigation and bombing practice run, a milk run from Fort Lauderdale. Taylor was an experienced pilot, but he was new to the area, and that small, crucial detail would be the catalyst for a tragedy so profound that it still chills the bone. The flight began smoothly. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, tough, heavy, reliable warbirds. Their mission was simple: fly east, drop practice bombs on a wreck in the Bahamas, and return. The weather was initially clear, the perfect postcard day. But around 3:45 p.m., a chilling conversation began to bleed into the airwaves. This wasn't a distress call. It was a conversation between men who suddenly, shockingly, realized they were lost. The visceral details are in the transcripts. You can hear the rising tension, the professional veneer beginning to crack under the strain of absolute, total confusion. The initial transmissions are between Taylor and one of the other pilots, Lieutenant Robert Cox. Taylor's voice, though initially calm, carries a strange, unsettling edge. He reports that both his compasses, his primary and his backup, are completely out, useless. Not malfunctioning, but spinning wildly, offering no direction. And here is the true horror. He insists he is over the Florida Keys, but his instruments and his senses are telling him something is fundamentally wrong. Now, imagine yourself in one of those cockpits. Below you is the familiar texture of the ocean, the endless, relentless blue, but everything around you is turning foreign. Taylor, the commander, the man they relied on, was convinced they were flying over land, or at least familiar waters. He repeatedly told his wingmen to turn back, to fly west. But the airmen with him, men who were familiar with the training area, were frantically reporting the opposite. They saw no land. They were surrounded by open sea, and they believed they were far off course, perhaps near the Bahamas. This is the great, awful contradiction of Flight 19. 5 experienced pilots, all seeing the same ocean, but living in 5 different, mutually exclusive realities. Taylor's navigational equipment had failed. A simple mechanical failure, perhaps. But his subsequent decision to trust his mistaken belief that he was over the Keys, over the clear, correct readings of his subordinates, was the fatal error. It was human stubbornness and overconfidence meeting a navigational catastrophe. Instead of flying west to what his wingmen knew was Florida, Taylor ordered them northeast, deeper into the heart of the triangle, deeper into the open ocean. The Air-Sea Rescue Base was listening in, paralyzed by the inability to intervene. They tried to guide Taylor, to convince him to switch command to one of the other pilots, to use his radio as a directional beacon, but the conversation was laced with confusion and increasing desperation. Taylor's final, garbled transmission captures the true nature of the Bermuda Triangle's terror. "We are entering white water. Nothing looks right. We don't know where we are. We seem to be completely lost." The term white water suggests they were flying into the churning, foamy chaos of a severe storm, one of those sudden, violent squall lines that materialize in minutes. The last thing ground control heard, around 7:04 p.m., was a desperate, panicked voice, not Taylor's, saying, "It looks like we are totally lost. We can't tell where we are." Followed by a burst of static so final and absolute that it was like a black curtain had been pulled across the ocean. The 5 planes, worth millions, and the 14 men inside them had vanished. Not crashed, but swallowed. The planes had enough fuel to fly for perhaps another hour and a half, yet nothing was ever found. No oil slick, no life vest, no splinter of debris. Just silence, And this is just the beginning of the horror. It only gets worse from here. Because the ocean didn't just take the players, it took the referee too. The massive, horrifying search for Flight 19 became the next victim. The finality of the silence from Flight 19 was a profound shock to the naval command. 5 planes, 14 men, vanished off the face of the earth after a chilling, recorded descent into absolute confusion. But in the context of the Bermuda Triangle's dark history, this was merely the setup for an even more tragically ironic event. The ocean didn't just take the players. It took the referee, too. We're talking about the horrifying aftermath, the immediate search and rescue effort that instantly turned into a double catastrophe. In the hours following the last panicked transmission from Flight 19, the military mobilized a massive rescue operation, the kind of professional response that was supposed to cut through the confusion and restore order. 2 PBM Mariner flying boats were dispatched. These were massive twin-engine aircraft designed for sea rescue, capable of landing on the water and carrying a large crew. They were the ultimate expression of human capability and advanced technology, dispatched to retrieve the victims of human error and mechanical failure. They were the reassuring cavalry coming over the hill. The Mariner, however, possessed a terrifying inherent flaw. It was a flying fuel tank. Its wings were designed to hold vast quantities of high-octane gasoline, and in the event of an engine malfunction or a fuel vapor leak, the entire craft was essentially a bomb waiting for a spark. It was a known issue. The aircraft had earned the grim nickname the Flying Gasoline Tank among its own crews. The irony, the sheer tragic absurdity of the situation is palpable. A rescue plane sent to save men from a watery grave was itself an accident waiting to happen. 2 for 1, baby, just like the medieval dentist who cuts your hair and pulls your molars. One of the mariners, designated Buno 59,225, took off at 7:27 p.m. with a massive crew of 13 men. This was not a routine flight. This was a high-stakes, frantic race against the clock and the dwindling light. The last known contact from Buno 59225 came less than half an hour later, at 7:50 p.m. It was a routine communication confirming its position, flying northeast, following the assumed last vector of the missing Flight 19. They were heading directly into the area where the first 5 aircraft had met their doom. Then, nothing. A wall of absolute, profound silence that immediately echoed the disappearance of the first squadron. It was too fast, too total to be a conventional mechanical failure followed by a slow descent. The initial interpretation was that the crew was busy searching and had simply gone radio silent. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the horrifying reality began to sink in. They had not merely lost a rescue plane, they had lost a second, entirely separate military aircraft with a massive 13-man crew. The subsequent reports offer the closest thing we have to an unvarnished truth of the mariner's fate. Several ships in the area reported seeing a sudden massive explosion that illuminated the sky for several seconds. A terrifying, bright fireball that lasted long enough to draw attention. One ship captain reported seeing a blinding flash, a burst of red flame, and then nothing. The consensus is grimly clear. The Mariner, the flying gasoline tank, had likely suffered a catastrophic mid-air explosion. It had either flown directly into a violent, sudden squall line that caused structural failure and a spark, or a vapor leak had finally found its ignition point. The sheer scale of the terror here is the most powerful element. It's the emotional arc from professional focus to utter devastation. The explosion would have been instant, total, and terrifyingly final. There would have been no time for a distress call, no time for a scream, not even time for the pilot to release the microphone button. One moment, they were flying over the ocean, searching for survivors. The next, they were 1,000 pieces of burning wreckage plunging into the unforgiving depths. The contradiction of this double disaster solidified the myth instantly. How could a simple navigational failure escalate into the disappearance of 5 planes, plus the loss of a large, dedicated rescue craft with an additional 13 souls, 36 men, 6 aircraft, all vanishing in the span of a single winter evening? This was statistically improbable, technically baffling, and profoundly terrifying to the public. The official report, struggling to reconcile the facts, could only conclude that the Flight 19 planes were presumed lost and that the Mariner was lost due to an explosion of undetermined origin. But the ocean, in its ruthless efficiency, offered no real closure. Not a single identifiable fragment from the Mariner or any of the 5 Avengers was ever recovered. The Gulf Stream, that swift, silent janitor of the deep, had already begun its work, sweeping the evidence into the vast, unsearchable abyss. The event became a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle's dark narrative, a place so cursed, so uniquely dangerous that it devoured its victims and then immediately swallowed the witnesses who came to find them. The story of Flight 19, the conversation that died in the static, became the legend. The Mariner, the search party that simply vanished, became the cold, hard, horrifying proof that the legend was terrifyingly real. Now that we have seen how the air claims its victims, let's look at the unthinkable loss the sea engineered long before. The complete disappearance of the massive naval vessel, the USS Cyclops. We've witnessed the terrifying efficiency with which the Bermuda Triangle's atmospheric and human factors can erase a squadron of planes and a dedicated rescue craft in mere hours. Now, we must turn our gaze from the sky to the sea and meet the single greatest, most baffling non-combat loss of life in the history of the United States Navy. This is the story of the USS Cyclops, a tragedy so colossal, so total, and so devoid of debris that it immediately shatters any notion that the Triangle's mysteries are confined to small boats and light aircraft. The USS Cyclops was a titan of its era. Launched in 1910, it was a massive naval collier, a bulk cargo ship used to transport coal and later heavy manganese ore. To give you a sense of its scale, it was 542 feet long, weighing 19,360 tons fully loaded. It carried a crew and passengers totaling 306 souls. This was not some nimble sailboat or a flimsy wartime bomber. This was a colossal symbol of naval power, a floating fortress of steel, designed to withstand the brutal whims of the North Atlantic. Its disappearance is the ultimate statistical improbability, a nautical catastrophe that should have left a wake of wreckage the size of a city block. The year was 1918. America had entered World War I. The Cyclops had been tasked with a vital mission: to transport a massive, heavy cargo of manganese ore from Brazil to Baltimore. Manganese is a dense, crucial alloy for hardening steel, essential for the war effort. The ship was heavily laden, sitting low in the water, a condition that made it unwieldy, top-heavy, and inherently more vulnerable to the monstrous waves of the Atlantic. The Cyclops made its last recorded stop in Barbados in early March 1918. The ship was already troubled. The captain, Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, had been complaining of engine problems, noting that the starboard engine was severely damaged and could not be used. This is the Unvarnished Truth detail. The ship left port handicapped, an injured Leviathan heading into a perilous stretch of ocean. The final log entry confirmed its departure from Barbados on March 4th. Its expected arrival in Baltimore was scheduled for March 13th. The contradiction here is staggering. A ship of that size, with that number of men, sailing in an era when maritime radio was widely in use, did not simply cease to exist. Yet the Cyclops was never seen again. Not a single distress signal was received. Not one piece of wreckage. Not a life ring. Not a splinter of wood. Not a single body was ever recovered. It was as if the 542-foot-long ship was a chalk drawing on a blackboard that had been wiped clean with a single massive swipe. Imagine the last moments. The ship, already listing and struggling with a single functioning engine, begins to encounter heavy seas. That massive shifting cargo of manganese ore, notoriously difficult to stabilize, begins to slide. The vessel would have been pitching violently. The crew, perhaps already weakened by the ship's slow speed and the strain of the overloaded hull, would have been fighting a losing battle against the enormous, sloshing weight below decks. We can paint a picture of the final, visceral chaos. The deafening creak of tortured steel, the roar of water on the main deck, the screams of the 306 men realizing, too late, that their colossal vessel was not a fortress but a coffin. There are theories, of course, ranging from the plausible to the utterly fantastical. Some believe the ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat, but no German records ever substantiated the claim. Some suspected the controversial Captain Worley, a man who was widely disliked and who many considered unstable, may have been involved in a German sympathizing plot to scuttle the vessel, but again, no proof ever emerged. But the most horrifyingly mundane and scientifically plausible scenario is that the massive cargo of heavy ore, combined with the structural weaknesses of an older ship struggling on one engine, led to a catastrophic immediate structural failure. The hull could have simply cracked open in a massive sea swell, flooding the ship so quickly that there was no time to launch a single lifeboat or send a final, desperate radio transmission. The final, absolute silence is what gives the Cyclops its chilling place in the Bermuda Triangle narrative. Long after the war ended, long after the search was officially called off, the Cyclops remained an enigma. The U.S. Navy, stunned by the sheer, unexplainable loss, eventually concluded in its official statement that the disappearance was one of the greatest mysteries in the annals of the sea, all attempts to locate her having proved unsuccessful, and the fate of the ship and all on board being unknown. The Cyclops did not just sink. It was removed. It was a 542-foot-long statement that the Bermuda Triangle does not discriminate based on size, power, or experience. If the sea wants you, it takes you instantly and without leaving a single clue. Now that we have established the devastating scale of loss in the air and on the water, we must turn our attention to the post-war commercial aviation boom, where civilian families and business travelers became the next victims of this terrifying stretch of ocean. We will look at the chilling disappearances of the Star Tiger and Star Ariel. We have established the Triangle's terrifying power, the protracted panic of Flight 19, the instant explosive doom of the Mariner, and the colossal silent erasure of the USS Cyclops. These were military losses, a bitter cost of war and training. Now, the terror leaves the domain of khaki and naval gray and enters the realm of the everyday citizen. We shift our focus to the post-war commercial boom, to the glamorous but fragile business of transatlantic flight, and the chilling, near-identical disappearances of the British South American Airways, BSAA airliners, Star Tiger and Star Ariel. This is the unvarnished truth of early commercial aviation. It was a high-stakes gamble. The planes were four-engine Avro Tudors, advanced for their time, but essentially pressurized metal tubes crossing thousands of miles of unforgiving ocean, relying on rudimentary navigation and the sheer professionalism of the crew. These were not military pilots on a mission. They were civilian crews carrying families, business travelers, and holidaymakers. Imagine yourself in the cramped, plush cabin of the Star Tiger on January 30th, 1948. You are flying from the Azores to Bermuda. The weather is initially fair, the journey exciting, a symbol of post-war modernity and connectivity. The plane carries 25 passengers and 6 crew. The flight is routine until around 3 a.m., when Captain David McCauley, a seasoned pilot, radios his position to the Bermuda Air Traffic Control Center. His message is completely normal. He reports his position, gives an estimated arrival time, and asks for a bearing. He is only 440 miles out. He is practically knocking on Bermuda's front door. And then, silence. No distress signal. No report of turbulence, engine failure, or fire. Not a whimper of static. The next communication from the Star Tiger was simply the void. The professional airmen, the comfortable passengers, the cutting-edge technology, all instantly, totally erased from the radar screen and the airwaves. A massive, frantic search and rescue operation was mounted, covering over 700,000 square miles of ocean, an area larger than Alaska. They found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no sign of a struggle. The official British report was forced to state, "It may be said that no more baffling problem has ever been recorded in the history of civil aviation." The public was already shaken. A commercial airliner, packed with paying customers, had simply vanished into the vastness of the sea. But a year later, the sheer, terrifying absurdity of the situation escalated. On January 17th, 1949, almost exactly a year later, the BSAA Avro Tudor Star Ariel took off from Bermuda, headed for Jamaica. It carried 13 passengers and 7 crew. This was a newer plane, fully maintained, with a different experienced crew. The weather was excellent. The visibility was perfect. Again, the transmission was mundane, routine, the absolute picture of normalcy. Captain John McPhee, at 9:42 a.m., reported his position and gave an estimated time of arrival. And again, a few minutes later, the radio channel went dead. Just like its sister ship, the Star Ariel vanished without a trace, without a word, without a single piece of evidence left to explain its fate. This is the ultimate contradiction that fueled the Bermuda Triangle myth. 2 identical aircraft following the same trajectory, disappearing in perfect, ideal weather conditions, almost exactly 1 year apart. It defies every statistical rule of human error, structural failure, and even the natural violence of the sea. It suggests an external, relentless, and almost intelligent force at work. Next time you complain about a flight delay, remember the people who simply vanished without a whisper. This is the modern connection that makes the triangle so potent. The vulnerability of our most advanced technology in the face of nature's relentless unpredictability. These planes were the pride of the British commercial fleet, yet the sea treated them with the same brutal indifference as it treated a single-engine private plane. The investigation into the Star Ariel was no more fruitful than the one for the Star Tiger. The official inquiries could not point to human error, weather, or mechanical failure with any certainty. The only thing they could definitively conclude was that the two aircraft and their 51 occupants had been annihilated without a final word. This horrifying double loss was the undeniable proof to the public that the Triangle was not just a historical anomaly. It was an active, hungry entity feeding on the very best of human progress. These incidents highlight the sheer terror of instant catastrophe. There was no time for a scream, no time for a mayday, not even time for the crew to realize what was happening. It's the difference between a long illness and a sudden, massive heart attack. One allows for preparation. The other is a shocking, absolute end. Now that we've witnessed the catastrophic finality of the disappearances, it's time to move beyond the ships and the planes and confront the most uncomfortable truth of all, the human equation, and how much of this horror is simply due to panic, poor piloting, and the ugly reality of human fallibility. We have cataloged the vanished, the squadrons, the giants, the commercial airliners, and the evidence points to a massive, unique, and terrifying confluence of natural and mechanical failures. But now, we must pivot hard to the most uncomfortable, most statistically probable, and least sensational explanation for the majority of the Triangle's victims: the human equation. The unvarnished truth is that for every grand, mysterious disappearance, there are dozens of minor accidents, bad decisions, and acts of profound, unforgiving human fallibility that were instantly and unforgivingly punished by the elements. Forget the romanticism of the noble lost sailor. The irony of the Bermuda Triangle is that it is a masterclass in turning small mistakes into total, absolute annihilation. The sea and the sky in this region are ruthless teachers who offer no second chances. And in this classroom, human error is the deadliest flaw. Let's talk about the ugly truth of piloting and seamanship in the mid-20th century. You're entering a high-traffic area with famously unpredictable weather and unique magnetic variance, which we'll get to. Were all the pilots flying through the Triangle the experienced, sober commanders of the USS Cyclops? Absolutely not. Ironic humor is needed here, because the truth is darkly comedic. An alarming number of early disappearances can be attributed to pilots who were overconfident, undertrained, or suffered catastrophic communication breakdowns. Were some of them perhaps flying with a blood alcohol content that should have grounded them? Statistically, yes. The Bermuda Triangle does not distinguish between a cosmic force and a pilot too drunk to read his altimeter. It is equally fatal to both. The concept of spatial disorientation is the true, visceral horror here. Imagine yourself in the cockpit on a night flight, or during one of the Triangle's sudden, total whiteout squall lines. Outside, there is no horizon. There are no stars. You are flying completely blind, relying entirely on your instruments. A non-instrument-rated pilot in this situation is dead in minutes. Your brain, deprived of visual cues, begins to lie to you. You feel like you are in a turn, so you fight the controls. In reality, you are straight and level, and your correction immediately sends the plane into a fatal spiral. You lose the horizon, you lose your mind, and you lose control. That terrifying, spiraling descent into the sea is not the work of a supernatural entity. It is the work of a perfectly healthy human brain reacting wrongly to a lack of visual data. And what about the sailors? The second-person immersion is crucial here. You are a recreational sailor, maybe crossing from Miami to the Bahamas. Your boat is sturdy but small. You have an outdated chart, a slightly dodgy radio, and a desire for adventure. The weather forecast was clear. Suddenly, one of the triangle's freak squall lines appears on the horizon, a black wall of compressed, violent weather that moves with the speed of a jet. You have seconds, not minutes, to react. Do you trust your inexperienced crew? Do you know the exact procedure to batten down the hatches against a force that could easily generate a 40-foot rogue wave? For many of the Triangle's victims, the answer was a resounding and final no. The contradiction of this area is that it demands perfection, but humans are inherently imperfect. It demands the absolute mastery of navigation, but it simultaneously makes all navigation impossibly difficult. The area's constantly shifting weather patterns and the intense, fast-moving Gulf Stream current mean that if you make a navigational error, say, you miscalculate your position by 50 miles, you are immediately and permanently lost. The current will sweep your wreckage away, and the sudden squall will obliterate your vessel. Your small mistake is amplified into an immediate catastrophe. This ties directly back to the concept of the active and dynamic language of the failure. These people didn't slowly drift off course. They were suddenly consumed by their own poor judgment. The undertrained pilot plunged his plane into the sea. The careless sailor capsized his boat against a freak wave. The triangle is a natural predator that exploits the weakest link in the chain, and more often than not, that link is the exhausted, overconfident, or panicking human mind. The true terror of the Bermuda Triangle is not what it takes from us, but what it reveals about us. That despite all our technology, all our training, and all our sophistication, we are still small, vulnerable creatures who are entirely at the mercy of the elements. When the weather turns black, when the instruments fail, and when panic sets in, the difference between a seasoned veteran and a terrified novice becomes razor thin. And the Bermuda Triangle offers no quarter. Now that we have addressed the uncomfortable truth of human fallibility, let's look at the sheer, unbridled rage of the natural elements themselves, specifically, the relentless, unforgiving power of the Gulf Stream. We've stripped away the cosmic fantasy and acknowledged the uncomfortable reality of human error. But to fully understand the triangle, we must now stand in awe of its most powerful accomplice, the geological and meteorological engine that ensures the silence is always absolute, the relentless, unforgiving power of the natural elements. Specifically, the Gulf Stream, the sudden, violent squall lines, and the deep, dark trenches that offer a final, perfect, unsearchable hiding place. The Gulf Stream is not just a current. It is a swift, powerful river within the Atlantic Ocean, a massive artery of warm water that originates in the Gulf of Mexico and tears northeastward along the eastern coast of the United States, cutting directly through the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. Experiential immersion is required here. Imagine a current flowing at speeds of up to 5 knots, a rate so fast it can make an enormous difference in the course of a struggling vessel or a downed aircraft in mere minutes. It is a watery, high-speed freeway that can carry debris and wreckage hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. This is the great, awful natural contradiction of the triangle, a beautiful, warm current that is also the ocean's most efficient janitor. It doesn't cause the disappearances, but it is the perfect cleaner. If an accident occurs, a ship sinks instantly, a plane ditches, the Gulf Stream goes to work with ruthless efficiency, immediately scattering any buoyant debris across a search radius so vast that it becomes impossible to cover. This is why the hallmark of a triangle disappearance is the absolute absence of wreckage. The debris doesn't sink. It is simply swept away until it is so thinly dispersed that a recovery operation is rendered hopeless. Beyond the relentless current, the triangle is a breeding ground for the meteorological equivalent of an ambush predator. Sudden, localized, violent weather known as squall lines and microbursts. You are sailing in perfect blue weather with a gentle breeze and high visibility. Your perfect blue day turns into a scene from a disaster movie in the time it takes you to sip your lukewarm coffee. These aren't the slow, predictable frontal systems that appear on a weather map days in advance. They are walls of churning, compressed storm cloud that materialize with impossible speed and strike with terrifying force. The visceral details of this phenomenon are terrifying. A microburst is a column of sinking air within a thunderstorm that hits the ground or the water with the force of a bomb, producing an outward burst of intense wind. For a small boat, a microburst means an instant capsize. For a plane, it means a sudden, catastrophic loss of lift and a violent downward plunge that no pilot, regardless of skill, can recover from. The wind shear is so extreme it can tear the wings off a small aircraft or snap the mast of a boat like a dry twig. This is not a slow drowning. It is an immediate, violent pulverization. Finally, we must consider the seabed. The Bermuda Triangle sits near some of the deepest oceanic trenches on Earth. Just off the coast of Puerto Rico lies the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean, plummeting to depths of over 27,000 feet. Any ship or large plane that is instantly sunk, perhaps by an internal explosion, a structural failure, or one of those devastating methane bubble releases we'll explore later, plummets thousands of feet into a crushingly deep, dark, and utterly inaccessible abyss. Active and dynamic language helps us visualize the finality. This is where the pressure is immense, the light is non-existent, and the wreckage is instantly buried under thousands of years of sediment. The wreckage isn't just lost, it's permanently sealed away. This is not a coastal shelf where sonar can easily locate a hull. This is a vast, mountainous underwater terrain that actively protects its secrets. The brutal truth is that the Bermuda Triangle is simply a geologically and meteorologically unique place that demands absolute respect and relentless preparedness. The combination of a massive, sweeping current, sudden violent weather patterns, and the deepest trenches in the Atlantic means that if you sink, you are not just lost, you are permanently, totally erased. It is the perfect natural engine for absolute disappearance. Now that we have established the elements that conceal the evidence, let's tackle one of the triangle's oldest, most enduring lies, the supposed magnetic anomaly that twists compasses and confuses the finest navigators. We've sailed past the silence, felt the terror of human error, and witnessed the destructive power of nature's relentless elements. Now, we must confront the most enduring piece of the Bermuda Triangle's lore, the very first myth that Christopher Columbus himself may have helped to foster. The idea of a unique magnetic anomaly that twists compasses and drives navigators mad. This is the contradiction at the heart of the mystery. Is it a real, unique force, or simply a convenient excuse for human error? The widely held belief, often repeated in sensationalist books and documentaries, is that the Bermuda Triangle is one of only two places on Earth where true north and magnetic north align, a phenomenon known as the agonic line. The myth claims that when a ship or plane crosses this line, the compass suddenly shifts, making traditional navigation impossible, thus causing pilots to become hopelessly lost and plummet into the sea. This is the simple, terrifying answer that people crave. But here is the unvarnished truth. The magnetic anomaly is a scientific lie. While the agonic line does pass through the general region of the Bermuda Triangle, it is not fixed in one spot. It constantly moves, slowly drifting westward over decades. And crucially, it is not unique to the triangle. There are countless places in the world where the magnetic and true north lines momentarily align. This natural, predictable phenomenon is a fact of global navigation, not a localized paranormal curse. The real-world terror of the compass is not that it spins madly due to some hidden force, but that pilots and sailors often fail to understand or properly account for a very basic navigational concept: magnetic variation. Every compass points to the magnetic North Pole, which is constantly shifting and is hundreds of miles away from the true geographic North Pole. The difference between these 2 points is the magnetic variation, and it changes depending on where you are on Earth. Every good navigator has a chart that tells them the exact variation for their area, and they must adjust their heading accordingly. The tragedy of the triangle is that for many of the early, smaller vessels and less trained pilots, this simple, predictable factor was either unknown, ignored, or miscalculated. Imagine the shared discovery moment. The pilot, used to flying in an area with little variation, suddenly enters the triangle where the variation is significant and fails to correct his compass reading by 10 or 20 degrees. That small error, compounded over hundreds of miles of flight, means he is not over his destination. He is hopelessly, drastically off course, flying toward the open Atlantic instead of the Florida coastline. He assumes his compass is malfunctioning due to a magnetic anomaly, when in reality, it is working perfectly. He just hasn't made the necessary mathematical correction. This is where the rhetorical questions cut deepest. Was the pilot a victim of a cosmic force, or was he a victim of his own poor training? The former is a sensationalist story, the latter is a terrifying truth. The compass didn't fail him, he failed the compass. The stories of compasses spinning wildly, like those in Flight 19, are often attributed to the magnetic anomaly, but the reality is more mundane and mechanical. A malfunctioning electrical system, proximity to a large piece of steel cargo, or a mechanical failure within the compass itself can easily cause the needle to behave erratically. The commander of Flight 19, Charles Taylor, reported his compasses were spinning, a mechanical malfunction in his specific aircraft that was instantly amplified into a massive mystery when coupled with his poor decision-making and the hostile environment. The enduring power of the great magnetic lie is that it provides a neat external explanation for human tragedy. It allows us to feel that we are battling an incomprehensible force of nature, rather than facing the terrifying reality that we are simply prone to mistakes that, in this unforgiving part of the world, are instantly and terminally fatal. The triangle itself is complicated enough without adding fictional magnetism. It is a geographically complex area where weather is sudden and violent, and where human mistakes are immediately fatal. Now that we have debunked the easy answer, we must, for a moment, give the fantastical its due before tearing it apart. We turn our attention to the theories that fill the void of explanation. Atlantis, UFOs, and the wonderful world of wishful thinking. We've systematically dismantled the easy answers. The great magnetic lie, the singular human error, the simple bad weather. Yet, the vast, profound, absolute silence left by the triangle's victims demands a corresponding explanation. a theory so grand and absolute that it can stand up to the scope of the mystery. This is where we enter the domain of the utterly fantastical, the realm of the conspiratorial, the sections where a good story always beats a complex, mundane truth. We are going to dedicate a section to the most compelling, widely believed theories that defy physics, science, and common sense. Submerged Atlantean power grids, alien abductions, and time warps. The central concept here is the deconstruction of romanticism in its most fictional form. These theories are not terrifying possibilities. They are entertaining narratives born out of a profound human desire for simple, absolute answers. The idea of a time warp, a sudden opening in the fabric of space-time, is psychologically comforting. It means the people aren't dead. They're just elsewhere. They exist in another dimension, living out their lives on a parallel Earth, awaiting a dramatic, Hollywood-style rescue. This is the witty, sarcastic humor necessary to handle the absurd. Maybe the aliens just have a really great intergalactic depot right over Miami, and they occasionally need a new 747 for parts. Or perhaps the Atlanteans are just tired of all the noisy air traffic. The most famous of these theories is the one involving the legendary lost continent of Atlantis. The story goes that when Atlantis sank thousands of years ago, its massive energy crystals, the source of its advanced utopian power, remained on the seabed of the triangle. These crystals, still operating with a latent, chaotic energy, occasionally emit powerful, disorienting rays that cause navigational equipment to fail, engines to seize, and the very structure of ships and planes to dissolve. Imagine the visceral details of this theory. You're not fighting a storm. You're fighting an ancient, humming crystal that unleashes a pulse of pure, devastating energy from the deep. It's a compelling, high-stakes science fiction narrative that requires no understanding of meteorology, hydrodynamics, or magnetic variation. It is a story so satisfying that it has been repeated, unchallenged, for decades. Then we have the extraterrestrial hypothesis, UFO abductions. This theory suggests that the disappearances are not accidents, but selective acts of collection. The triangle is a hunting ground, a testing site, or perhaps a cosmic toll booth, where alien craft snatch advanced human technology and its occupants for study. The absolute lack of wreckage is the key piece of evidence here. After all, an alien saucer would meticulously clean up after itself, wouldn't it? It's the ultimate erasure theory. This theory provides the grandest form of exaggeration for impact. It turns every lost soul into a participant in a cosmic drama. The victims are not just victims of nature. They are now subjects of a massive, multi-galactic conspiracy. This is the ultimate comfort blanket for the unexplained. If you can't find the answer on Earth, look to the stars. But this is where we have to deliver the final, cold punch of the unvarnished truth. There is precisely zero credible scientific evidence for Atlantean crystals, UFO abductions, or time warps in the Bermuda Triangle. The fantastical stories we tell about the triangle are simply a reflection of our collective discomfort with two concepts: the sudden, random cruelty of nature and the finality of not knowing. The truth is terrifying in its banality. The reason a plane vanishes is rarely because an alien craft zapped it. It is almost always because the aircraft plunged into the deepest trench in the Atlantic during a sudden storm, and the Gulf Stream swept the tiny fragments of wreckage away. The story of the Atlantean crystal is easier to grasp than the subtle, complex physics of ocean currents and gas release from the seabed. The latter requires thought. The former demands only belief. So, we can enjoy the thrill of the sci-fi explanation, but we must acknowledge it as just that, fiction. We must now turn back to a scientific theory that is as terrifying as any alien abduction, but which is terrifyingly real, geologically plausible, and scientifically supported. We move from the wonderful world of wishful thinking to the horrific reality of the methane hydrates, the bubbling scientific horror that can swallow a ship instantly and without a sound. We've navigated the human errors and dismissed the fantastical, but the absolute, sudden, total disappearance of massive ships like the Cyclops, without time for a single distress call, demands an explanation of immediate, catastrophic force. We now turn to a scientific theory that is as terrifying as any alien abduction because it is utterly real, geologically plausible, and scientifically supported. The phenomenon of methane hydrates. This is the ultimate example of a natural terror that is silent, invisible, and instantly annihilating. This is a deep dive into the visceral details of geology. Methane hydrates are essentially frozen gas bubbles, massive deposits of methane gas trapped within a cage of water molecules. These deposits are buried deep beneath the continental shelves, including sections of the Bermuda Triangle's seabed, held in a stable, frozen state by the immense pressure and cold temperature of the deep ocean. Think of it as frozen, explosive natural gas, lying dormant beneath thousands of feet of water and sediment. The terrifying part is the release mechanism. A shift in the seabed, perhaps due to a minor earthquake, a slump of sediment, or a change in water temperature, can cause these frozen cages to destabilize and instantly revert back to a massive, rapidly expanding gaseous state. The result is a gigantic, rapidly rising bubble of methane gas that erupts from the seabed and roars toward the surface. Now, imagine the moment this invisible bubble reaches the surface, precisely beneath a massive ship like the Cyclops. This is the active and dynamic language of annihilation. The water's density is suddenly, instantly, and catastrophically reduced. The massive volume of methane gas turns the water into a churning, frothing mixture, essentially a carbonated ocean, a thick, bubbly soup that can no longer support the weight of a hull. The ship doesn't slowly sink, it falls. It is a terrifying immediate loss of buoyancy. A massive 20,000-ton vessel is instantly swallowed by the hole in the ocean where its buoyancy used to be. There is no sound of splintering wood, no slow listing, no time to launch a lifeboat. The ship is enveloped by the frothing mixture, overwhelmed by the sudden absence of water density, and pulled down into the depths as if by a massive unseen hand. The evidence for this theory is compelling because it perfectly explains the absolute lack of warning. The event would be so instantaneous that there would be no time for a radio call. The ship's engines would likely die immediately from the ingestion of the gas, and the crew on the bridge would have no time to comprehend what was happening before the deck was awash with a sudden, violent swell of water. The sheer speed and totality of the methane-induced sinking are unique, unlike the slow, audible tragedy of a ship that has been holed by a rock or a rogue wave. Build-up and release are inherent in this theory. The tension builds in the thought of this massive, invisible reservoir of explosive gas lying dormant beneath you. The release is the instantaneous, silent sinking that leaves absolutely no trace. The victims are not just lost. They are essentially entombed by a geological event. While the methane hydrate theory has not been proven to be the cause of every disappearance, it provides a powerful, scientifically grounded counterpoint to the alien and Atlantean hypotheses. It offers a terrifying, real-world mechanism for the instant, total erasure of a massive object without debris, without a distress signal, and without a trace. It reminds us that the Bermuda Triangle is not only a meteorological hazard, but a geological ticking time bomb. The ocean has multiple ways of killing, and the most frightening are often the most mundane, the most rooted in the Earth's own natural processes. Now that we have explored the chemical and geological terror, we must return to the surface of the water, where another natural anomaly, equally terrifying and equally unheralded, waits to strike. We turn our attention to the silent killers of the sea, rogue waves and massive, unpredictable swells. We have explored the triangle's repertoire of destruction, from the human failing of the pilots to the geological horror of the methane bomb. But the sea itself, in its moments of profound, random violence, harbors a silent killer that requires no magnetic anomaly or deep-sea tremor to strike. We now confront the terrifying reality of rogue waves and massive, unpredictable swells, a force capable of splitting a tanker in half on an otherwise calm day. This is the unvarnished truth of the ocean. It is capable of generating massive, unpredictable walls of water that defy the expected statistical height of surrounding waves. These are not the normal swells of a heavy storm. They are solitary, gigantic liquid mountains that materialize from a relatively calm or moderate sea, sometimes reaching heights of over 100 feet. They are the boogeymen of the deep, and for centuries, sailors dismissed them as nothing more than the exaggerated tales of terrified men. Experiential immersion places you directly in the face of this terror. You are on a vessel, perhaps a sturdy cargo ship, cutting through what appears to be a manageable sea. The waves are 10, maybe 15 feet. Suddenly, a sound like a distant, massive clap of thunder reaches your ears. You turn to look and see a sheer, vertical wall of churning water, 2 or 3 times the size of every wave around it, rising out of the blue, bearing down on your position. The psychological impact is immediate. Disbelief followed by total, paralyzing fear. This is not a force you can prepare for. It is an act of pure, random violence. The sheer mass and momentum of a 100-foot rogue wave hitting a ship is enough to snap the hull, obliterate the bridge, or instantly capsize the vessel. It is a concentrated act of impact that makes the slow, miserable process of sinking irrelevant. The ship is essentially flattened, pushed under the surface and overwhelmed before it has a chance to right itself. This is the key to their terror. They strike without warning. There is no weather front that heralds their arrival, no atmospheric pressure drop that signals their formation. They are believed to be formed by a complex interplay of wind, currents, and different wave systems converging and reinforcing each other in a sudden, catastrophic overlap. The Bermuda Triangle, with its intense Gulf Stream current, its sudden storms, and its busy wave-generating traffic, is the perfect environment for these oceanic singularities to form. The repetitive phrase for emphasis here is the utter lack of evidence. A massive rogue wave, if it sinks a ship, does so instantly, leaving behind scattered, pulverized debris that the Gulf Stream will immediately devour. There is no beacon, no signal, no time to even scream before the ship is crushed. The radio is destroyed, and the vessel is on its terminal descent to the deep trenches. The damage is so total and instantaneous that it mimics the silent annihilation attributed to the methane bombs or the fictional time warps. The terror of the rogue wave is that it is a scientific fact that functions as a supernatural event. It is a force that is completely natural but utterly unpredictable, lending credence to the idea that the triangle is somehow special or cursed. In reality, It is simply a high-traffic area that is subject to the most extreme and least understood forces of the open ocean. So, while the methane hydrates provide the terrifying explanation for the instant, trace-free sinking of the largest ships, the rogue waves provide the terrifying explanation for the instant, violent destruction of those same ships. Both lead to the same finality: absolute silence and an empty sea. Now that we have explored the natural and scientific terrors that genuinely cause these disasters, we must finally pull back and examine the last piece of the puzzle: the powerful human storytellers who were not victims of the triangle, but were instead the meticulous architects of its enduring viral myth. We turn to the media, the writers, and the statistics that were cleverly molded to create the legend itself. We have explored the triangle's terrifying reality, the perfect storm of human error, geological hazard, and meteorological violence that explains the vast majority of its disappearances. Yet, the question remains: why does this stretch of ocean, which statistically is no more dangerous than any other major shipping lane, possess such a unique, globally recognized, and utterly terrifying reputation? The answer lies not in the water or the sky, but on the printed page and in the public imagination. We must now turn to the final, most cunning accomplice in this mystery: the media and the powerful storytellers who meticulously manufactured the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. This is the process of humanizing the greats, in this case, the writers and journalists who built their careers on the sensationalization of loss. The myth did not spontaneously generate. It was carefully crafted, compiled, and aggressively marketed, largely beginning in the 1950s and exploding in the 1970s. The true genius of the myth is that it took isolated, tragic, and utterly separate events: the Cyclops in 1918, Flight 19 in 1945, the Star Tiger in 1947-1948, and glued them together with a catchy name and a single chilling explanation. The very term Bermuda Triangle was coined by writer Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 article for Argosy magazine titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle." Gaddis was the initial architect, and his prose perfectly fit the required narrative voice: dramatic, conspiratorial, and laced with rhetorical questions that demanded a fantastical answer. He didn't just report on the losses. He framed them as part of a continuous, ongoing, and intelligent pattern of paranormal destruction. But the real explosion in the triangle's popularity came with the work of Charles Berlitz, whose 1974 bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle, became an international phenomenon. Berlitz, a linguist and polyglot, approached the subject not as a scientist or a historian, but as a master storyteller. His book was a relentless compilation of every known and often misreported disappearance in the area, all filtered through the lens of the supernatural. The contradiction that Berlitz exploited was simple: the contrast between the cold facts and the compelling narrative. He frequently ignored the mundane, factual explanations for a vessel's loss, such as structural failure, poor seamanship, or known engine trouble, and instead presented them all as inexplicably vanished. A key feature of his storytelling was the consistent use of exaggeration for impact. Berlitz inflated the number of incidents, included ships and planes that had actually been found or had sunk outside the triangle's boundaries, and omitted the final non-paranormal conclusions of official accident reports. For example, he would detail a ship that vanished without a trace, but omit the inconvenient truth that the Coast Guard had concluded it sank in a known storm hundreds of miles away. The narrative demanded that the disappearance be total, silent, and without cause. Berlitz was a master of selection, ensuring that only the most baffling and dramatic details made it to the page, thereby creating a myth that was far more potent and terrifying than the truth. This directly relates to the modern connection. The 1970s media hysteria around the triangle is the analog to modern viral content creation. The story was simple, shocking, easily repeatable, and demanded no difficult scientific understanding. A powerful story always wins the day over a complex, multifaceted truth. The Bermuda Triangle became the ultimate shorthand for unexplained mystery, instantly marketable and universally understood. The unvarnished truth that the media obscured is this: while hundreds of incidents have occurred in the region, the official records from Lloyd's of London and the U.S. Coast Guard clearly show that the triangle is not statistically more dangerous than any other heavily traveled, weather-prone body of water. The North Atlantic, the South China Sea, and even the Great Lakes have comparable, if not higher, rates of marine loss. The only unique factor the triangle possesses is its viral narrative. The legacy of these writers is that they essentially created a myth so potent that it achieved cultural gravity. They were not victims of the sea, but clever manipulators of its tragic events, transforming individual human catastrophes into a single, cohesive, paranormal brand. The Bermuda Triangle is less a physical place and more a brilliant piece of marketing. Now that we have exposed the myth's architects, we must synthesize everything we have learned, the terror, the science, and the fiction, to reach a powerful reflective conclusion about what the silence of the triangle truly means. We have journeyed through the terrifying silence of the Bermuda Triangle, navigating the chilling transcripts of Flight 19, standing in awe of the colossal, silent loss of the Cyclops, and exposing the clever construction of the viral media myth. We've faced the uncomfortable truth of human error, the relentless brutality of the Gulf Stream, the instant annihilation of methane hydrates, and the sheer sudden violence of rogue waves. Now, as our journey nears its end, we must synthesize everything we have learned, the science, the statistics, and the compelling human stories, to address the lingering question: what does the absolute silence of the Bermuda Triangle really mean, and why does this particular stretch of ocean hold such a profound, terrifying grip on the global imagination? The answer, as we've discovered, is the ultimate contradiction. The Bermuda Triangle is not a unique zone of paranormal activity, but it is, in every measurable way, a uniquely dangerous stretch of water. It is a geographically complex area where every natural danger is amplified and every human mistake is terminally punished. The real terror is not that an external magical force is at work, but that the confluence of entirely natural, measurable phenomena, fierce, unheralded squall lines, the massive drag of the Gulf Stream, and the potential for instant geological catastrophe, create a perfect, beautiful death trap. The silence is not the result of a deliberate, calculated cosmic act. It is the overwhelming, final sound of nature's perfect indifference. Let's return to the emotional arc of this terror. The enduring power of the triangle lies in its status as a reflection of humanity's deepest, most primal fears: the sudden loss of control, the failure of our most advanced technology, and the complete finality of not knowing. In a world where we can track a package in real time and speak across continents instantly, the triangle is a defiant symbol of the untamable. It strips away the comforting illusion that we have conquered the world with our maps, our engines, and our navigation systems. When a plane vanishes 400 miles from shore without a single distress signal, it is a profound, terrifying reminder of how vulnerable we remain in the face of the elements. Think of the pilot of Flight 19, Charles Taylor. His was a tragedy of ego, inexperience in the region, and a mechanical failure that spiraled into disaster. Yet, we remember it as a supernatural disappearance, not a human one. The powerful, reflective conclusion must be that the triangle provides an essential service to the human psyche. It allows us to externalize our failures. It is less terrifying to believe a massive crystal zapped the plane than it is to believe that a highly trained commander, due to a moment of panic and stubbornness, flew 14 men to their deaths. The silence is also a brutal demonstration of the efficiency of the ocean. The vast, unsearchable depths of the Puerto Rico Trench, combined with the relentless washing power of the Gulf Stream, ensure that no identifiable trace is left behind. The ocean has perfected the art of the perfect crime scene cleanup. This total absence of evidence is what sustains the myth. If every downed plane and every sunken ship were found and officially attributed to known weather or mechanical failure, the legend would die. But the ocean, in its ruthless geological indifference, protects the myth by constantly erasing the proof. So, what did the Bermuda Triangle really take? It took ships and planes, yes, and thousands of human lives. But mostly, it took our comfortable belief that we are always, completely, in control. It replaced that belief with a sense of awe and a profound, chilling respect for the massive, non-sentient forces that govern our planet. The terrifying question is not what is out there, but who is out there, meaning who is the next pilot or mariner to make a small, fatal miscalculation that is instantly and terminally amplified by this unforgiving environment. The final word belongs to the victims. The mystery is not about the coordinates. It is about the 306 souls aboard the Cyclops, the 14 airmen of Flight 19, and the countless families aboard the Star Tiger and Star Ariel. They remain nameless in the public eye, but not voiceless. Their final garbled transmissions, their last frantic moments of terror, echo through the airwaves and the history books, serving as a permanent, chilling testament to the sea's unrelenting power. The Bermuda Triangle will continue to capture our imagination, not because it is a portal to another dimension, but because it is the ultimate, natural demonstration of chaos. It is the one place on the map where our advanced, technologically secure world is instantly, totally, and silently defeated. It is the ocean, reminding us that despite our best efforts, our arrogance, our satellites, and our engines, we are still guests on this planet, and nature can revoke our invitation at any time, with a sudden, devastating squall or an invisible bubble of gas from the deep. Next time you look at a clear blue sky over the ocean, remember that beneath the beauty lies the chaos, and in that chaos lies the eternal, terrifying silence of the triangle. The mystery is solved, but the terror is eternal. We have closed the book on the disappearances, the science, and the men who exploited the tragedy for profit. But the true final stage of this historical deep dive is a quiet reflection on the journey itself. You are no longer in the cockpit of the doomed Avenger or on the deck of the listing Cyclops. You are back in your seat, the lights are up, and you carry the weight of the Triangle's terrifying knowledge. The enduring echo of this place is not a burst of static, but the silence itself, a monumental, chilling quiet that serves as humanity's greatest, most humbling monument to the limitations of our control. The modern connection is where the terror truly crystallizes. You now know that when you fly from Miami to the Bahamas, or sail from Florida to Bermuda, You are traversing an environment of exquisite, violent efficiency. You are relying on a massive technological stack: GPS satellites, advanced weather radar, powerful inertial navigation systems that simply did not exist for the victims of the 1940s. Yet, the deep, visceral fear remains, and it is no longer the fear of mythical creatures or alien zaps. It is the calculated, terrifying possibility of scientific probability. It is the understanding that one massive methane eruption, one rogue wave, or one sudden compressed microburst still operates outside the speed and capability of even our most advanced systems. Think of the difference between the garbled, frantic radio transmissions of Flight 19, where the men were lost both in space and communication, and a modern vessel. If a ship goes down today, the crew has EPIRB beacons, life rafts with satellite transmitters, and almost instantaneous global rescue capability. The unvarnished truth of the modern triangle is this: if a vessel or aircraft still vanishes without a trace in the 21st century, the cause is no longer simple error or archaic technology. It is an event of such total, catastrophic, and immediate force, like the hull-snapping force of a rogue wave or the instantaneous loss of buoyancy from a methane plume, that it overcomes all of our contemporary defenses. The modern silence is thus even more chilling than the historical one, as it represents a triumph of pure, overwhelming natural power over the absolute peak of human ingenuity. This leads to the final contradiction: the reality versus the psychology. The statisticians are correct. The triangle is not statistically unique in terms of accidents. But the storytellers are also correct. The triangle is entirely unique in terms of narrative and erasure. What makes it terrifying is not the frequency of the loss, but the finality of the loss. When a ship sinks in the North Atlantic, wreckage is often found, and the crew's fate is typically determined. When a vessel vanishes in the triangle, the silence is total, the void is absolute, and the narrative remains open-ended. It is the ultimate cliffhanger, repeated hundreds of times over a century. That open-endedness is what our collective imagination cannot tolerate. And it is the gap that the sensationalists like Gaddis and Berlitz were only too happy to fill with crystals and saucers. They saw the terror in the vacuum of information and weaponized it. The emotional arc must end on a note of awe mixed with profound sympathy. Awe for the sheer power of this environment, a natural engine that combines deep-sea geology, massive hydrology, and meteorological intensity. Sympathy for the victims, who were not simply unlucky, but were caught in a perfect, brutal Venn diagram of human fallibility and natural hostility. Their terror was not mythical. It was the agonizing, final reality of being utterly alone, watching the horizon disappear and the compass spin its pointless dance. We now know that their panic was justified, but their faith in their own capabilities was tragically misplaced. They were simply crossing the wrong piece of ocean at the worst possible time. The most valuable takeaway from this entire deep dive is a lesson in humility. Long before she was the Empress, long before she painted her pain, the Earth was a massive, non-sentient sphere governed by forces of gravity, pressure, and temperature that operate completely independently of our desires. The Bermuda Triangle is a scar on the map where those forces occasionally converge with maximum devastating efficiency. It is the world reminding us that despite our best efforts, our arrogance, our satellites, and our powerful engines, we are still guests on this planet, and nature can revoke our invitation at any time. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass, not for our ancestors, but for the engineers who designed the modern hull, for the scientists who mapped the deep-sea methane, and for the pilots who successfully navigated the ever-shifting magnetic lines. They didn't overcome the triangle's power. They simply learned to respect it, to meticulously account for its variables, and to prepare for the absolute, final consequence of failure. The silence that blankets the thousands of lives lost in the triangle is not a mystery to be solved. It is a monument to be respected. It stands as a perpetual, chilling testament to the sea's unrelenting power, a place that took the ships, took the planes, and left only an endless, terrifying void as its final, absolute answer. The legend is terrifying. The truth is even more so, and the silence remains eternal. The journey into the vortex is over, but the echo of the lost will never fade. Thank you for diving into the darkness with me. If you like it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more.